At my brother's wedding, standing in front of 300 guests from Phoenix's business elite, my father took the mic and called me a low-ranking soldier, a public humiliation I never imagined would come from my own family. What he didn't know was that the following Monday, my secret identity as a major general would be revealed as I took my seat at the head of a Pentagon table, deciding the future of his company. My name is David Harrison. I'm 34 years old, a major general in the U.S. Army specializing in special operations, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Few people know this, but my life has always been split between two completely opposite realities. On one side, I lead classified missions to protect national security. On the other, in my family's eyes, I'm just the son who chose to be a soldier. This double life has followed me for over a decade, ever since I turned down a guaranteed spot at Harvard to enroll in military academy. That was the moment my father, Richard Harrison, CEO of CyberShield Industries, decided I had thrown my life away. The rejection started subtly, almost imperceptibly. In the first weeks after I enlisted, I still got the occasional call asking if I'd come to my senses about this nonsense. My mom, Linda, tried to play peacemaker, but it was clear she didn't understand my choice either. Gradually, the calls became less frequent. Family dinner invites started drying up, and my emails about military promotions and achievements were met with short, formal replies. What bothered me most wasn't the lack of support, but the total lack of understanding about what I actually did. While Kevin got praised for every minor success at the company, my missions in Iraq and Syria were brushed off as toy soldier games whenever they came up. My father would say I was wasting time in uniform when I could be building something real at CyberShield. This distorted view of military service as something lesser, less meaningful, kept driving a deeper wedge between us. Family gatherings became exercises in patience and self-restraint. Kevin always had stories about new contracts, company expansions, business trips to Silicon Valley. My father listened with genuine pride, asking detailed questions and offering strategic advice. When it was my turn to speak, the subject would quickly change or be cut off by some urgent company matter. The respect I earned in the military stood in sharp contrast to the indifference I received at home. High-ranking colleagues sought me out for strategic consultations. Generals praised my leadership in critical situations, and my name appeared in confidential Pentagon reports. But when I visited Phoenix, I was treated with the same polite distance you'd give a vague acquaintance. My father never asked what I actually did. He never showed any curiosity about the operations I led. Over the years, this family dynamic solidified into a painful, predictable pattern. Kevin was the golden child, the natural heir, the one who understood what really matters in life. I was the problem son, the naive idealist, the one who chose to serve others instead of serving the family. That narrative played on repeat, in every conversation, every gathering, every unspoken glance. What they didn't know was that while Kevin managed contracts worth a few $1 million, I was involved in operations moving billions in national defense funding. While he negotiated with private tech firms, I coordinated classified projects shaping the future of American cybersecurity. The irony was brutal. CyberShield Industries, the empire my father built and Kevin helped expand, depended indirectly on decisions and policies that passed across my desk at the Pentagon. But that information stayed with me, locked away by military secrecy and my own wounded pride. Then came Kevin's wedding invitation, a grand event, planned for months, with over 300 guests, including top executives and partners of CyberShield Industries. My brother had picked a date that happened to align with my return from a classified mission in the Middle East, and for a moment, I thought it might be a chance to reconnect with my family. What I didn't know was that this wedding would become the stage for a revelation that would change everything. The morning of the wedding started with a family breakfast that was supposed to be a moment of celebration, but instead it turned into a public display of the disdain my father felt for my life choices. Sitting at the head of the table, skimming CyberShield reports on his tablet, he decided it was the perfect time for yet another one of his life lessons on how I'd wasted my potential. "David, you're 34 and still playing soldier," he said without even looking up. as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Kevin, standing beside him adjusting his tux for the pre-ceremony photos, chimed in with that same smug smile I'd known since we were kids. "Dad's right, David. While you're out there marching around, I'm closing $15 million deals for the company," he said, like he was offering brotherly advice. My mom, Linda, tried to smooth things over with a weak, "Boys, let's keep it festive today." But her voice was so soft it barely rose above the clinking coffee cups. But the real blow came later that night, during the reception, with more than 300 guests packed into the hotel's main ballroom. My father had drunk just enough to lose any remaining sense of social filter and decided it was the perfect moment to show the world how he really felt about my work. He stood up during the toast, took the mic, and after praising Kevin for building the future of American tech, turned to me with a smile that never reached his eyes. "And here's my other son, David, who chose to be a low-ranking soldier instead of building an empire with us," he said. The awkward silence that followed was broken only by a few nervous laughs. The word low-ranking echoed through the ballroom like a slap in the face, wiping away any shred of military respect I might have expected from my own family. I felt my face burn as hundreds of eyes turned toward me, watching my public humiliation unfold. In that moment, something inside me crystallized. Not explosive rage, but something colder, more focused. I stood up, straightened my jacket with the same precision I used to fix my uniform, and walked calmly toward my father, who was still holding the mic. Without raising my voice, I said, "Thanks for the toast, Dad. Enjoy the party," then turned and walked out of the room with measured, deliberate steps. As I walked through the hotel hallways, I could hear the buzz of conversations picking up again behind me, probably speculating about what had just gone down. My identity as the problem child had now been publicly confirmed in front of Phoenix's business elite, and I knew this wasn't just a slip. It had been a deliberate choice. In the elevator, staring at my reflection in the polished metal doors, I made a decision that would change everything. There would be no more attempts at reconciliation. The revenge forming in my mind that night wasn't impulsive or destructive. It was far more refined and strategic. I had information my father and Kevin didn't know I had. I had access to documents they didn't even know existed. And more importantly, I had a meeting scheduled for Monday that would completely shift the power dynamic between us. They had chosen to publicly humiliate me, turning my military career into a joke in front of their corporate peers. Back in my hotel room, I took off my jacket and tie, and for the first time in years, I felt crystal clear about what I needed to do. This wasn't about seeking family approval anymore. It was about justice. Not just for me, but for every service member ever disrespected by people who have no idea what sacrifice really means. The next morning, while my family slept off the celebration, I made a few quiet phone calls about Monday's meeting, and those calls would change everything. They were about to find out that this low-ranking soldier had more control over their future than they ever imagined. The morning after the wedding, while the rest of the family was still nursing their hangovers, I sat in my hotel room with a black coffee in hand and my laptop open, reviewing documents no one else in that house had access to. The public humiliation from the night before had crystallized something inside me. Not destructive anger, but a razor-sharp clarity I recognized from my most critical missions in the Middle East. The first item on my silent checklist was Monday's meeting about Operation Guardian, a national cybersecurity defense initiative involving over $2 billion in government contracts. As the Major General with final approval authority, I had full access to all documentation from the bidding companies, including CyberShield Industries. I opened my classified folder and started reviewing CyberShield's documents with far more scrutiny than I'd ever given them before. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Discrepancies in the financial reports signed by Kevin, numbers that didn't match the submitted contracts, and what looked like an attempt to artificially inflate the company's operational capabilities. The most shocking discovery came when I cross-referenced the financial data with the internal audit reports Kevin had signed over the past 6 months. There was nearly a $15 million gap between what the company claimed to have in cash reserves and what it actually possessed, a discrepancy that could point to anything from poor management to deliberate fraud. I closed the laptop and walked to the hotel window, watching Phoenix wake up to another bright Sunday as I processed the magnitude of what I'd just uncovered. This wasn't just about an arrogant father dismissing his son's military career, or a spoiled brother acting superior. This was about a company potentially deceiving the U.S. government and jeopardizing national security contracts. I picked up my phone and made 3 quiet calls to colleagues at the Pentagon, requesting a more rigorous audit of CyberShield's documentation before Monday's meeting. The revenge I'd imagined the night before was evolving into something far more meaningful, fulfilling my duty as a public servant, no matter the personal cost. At Sunday lunch with the family, I wore my usual mask of calm while watching Kevin and my father excitedly talk about the huge opportunities opening up for CyberShield in the coming months. I chewed my sandwich silently, knowing that in less than 24 hours, that confident conversation would give way to a much harsher reality. That night, as I packed to return to Washington, I received a text from my assistant confirming that all key executives would be present at Monday's meeting. For the first time since the wedding, I smiled, picturing the look on my father's face when he walked into that room expecting low-level military bureaucrats and instead saw me, in uniform, sitting at the head of the table as Major General David Harrison. On Monday morning, as I reviewed the final CyberShield documents ahead of the afternoon meeting, I stumbled upon something that completely changed how I saw the entire family situation. What began as a routine check of government contracts turned into the uncovering of a much larger and more dangerous scheme than I'd ever imagined. The financial irregularities I'd flagged on Sunday weren't isolated mistakes or poor management. They were part of a systematic pattern of fraud going back at least 2 years. Kevin had built a network of shell companies that artificially inflated project costs, siphoning off millions that were meant to be invested in real national security. The most shocking part came when I cross-checked CyberShield's data with other defense contracts under my oversight. At least 6 other companies were using the exact same fraudulent model. This wasn't about a spoiled brother trying to impress our father. This was a conspiracy that threatened the cybersecurity of the entire country. I called my assistant and requested a full-scale investigation into all related contracts, involving the FBI and the Pentagon's internal audit team. The justice I had been pursuing had now become something far bigger, protecting the nation from people who were literally selling out our security for personal gain. By the time I finished compiling all the evidence, the picture was clear. My family wasn't just arrogant and dismissive. They were criminals, betraying the very country I had sworn to defend. The low-ranking soldier title they mocked me with was about to become the one thing that could save them from facing even worse consequences. 2 hours before the meeting, I got confirmation that federal agents would be present during the discussions, ready to act if our suspicions were confirmed. My father and Kevin had no idea they were walking straight into a trap built by their own greed and arrogance. I adjusted my uniform one last time before heading to the Pentagon, knowing this afternoon's meeting wasn't just about military contracts. It was about vengeance reborn as patriotic duty, about military respect finally being earned, and about a family learning that underestimating a major general can have devastating consequences. As I drove into Washington, I couldn't stop thinking about the brutal irony of it all. They had spent years calling me a failure, an insignificant soldier, a man who had wasted his life serving his country. Now, that very service was about to bring down everything they had built on lies and betrayal. At 2:30 p.m. on Monday, I walked into the Pentagon conference room in full military uniform, every major general insignia perfectly aligned on my chest. The expression on my father's face when he saw me is something I'll never forget. A mix of shock, confusion, and absolute terror that spread across his features like ink in water. Kevin was sitting next to him, nervously flipping through CyberShield's proposal documents, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. All the executives in the room stood in military respect as I entered. "Good afternoon, Major General Harrison," said the colonel in charge of logistics, and I saw my brother choke on his coffee as he processed what he had just heard. My father tried to mask the growing panic in his eyes, but it was too late. The truth had been revealed in a brutal and irreversible way. I walked to the head of the meeting table and took my place as session leader, watching each reaction with the same strategic composure I used in military operations. "Gentlemen," Let's begin the review of the contracts for Operation Guardian, I announced in the same calm voice I had used at Sunday breakfast. The difference now was that this voice carried the full authority of my rank, and everyone in the room knew it. During the first 15 minutes of the meeting, I followed standard protocol, reviewing the technical aspects of each proposal without showing any favoritism or personal animosity. When it was CyberShield's turn, I opened the folder containing the irregularities I had discovered and began presenting point by point the financial discrepancies that made the company unfit for national security contracts. Kevin tried to interrupt twice but was politely silenced by military protocol. No one speaks without the Major General's permission. The financial reports submitted by CyberShield Industries show serious inconsistencies that compromise the integrity of the project, I said, maintaining direct eye contact with Kevin as I spoke. The military respect they had denied me so publicly at the wedding now manifested through the absolute silence of everyone present, hanging on every word that left my mouth. My father tried to rise from his chair, but the gravity of the situation kept him frozen in place. The low-ranking soldier identity they had assigned to me was being replaced by the reality of who I truly was, the man deciding the fate of billions of dollars in national defense contracts. Every document I presented, every inconsistency I exposed, every word I delivered with military authority was systematically dismantling the image they had built of me. Kevin was visibly sweating, realizing his signature was on every fraudulent document I was presenting. When I finished outlining the irregularities, I gave a discreet signal to my assistant, who immediately contacted the federal agents waiting outside. Gentlemen of CyberShield, you are hereby formally notified that this company is under federal investigation for potential fraud in government contracts, I announced with the same professional coldness I used to coordinate field operations. My father finally found his voice and tried to protest, but I stopped him with a simple hand gesture, the same one I used to silence subordinates in critical situations. The justice I had sought didn't come through shouting or emotional confrontation, but through the cold, impartial application of military and federal law. As the agents entered the room to escort my father and Kevin for questioning, I remained seated at the head of the table, watching as vengeance transformed into duty fulfilled. I was finally receiving the respect that my career and dedication to this country had always deserved, but that my own family had refused to acknowledge until that devastating moment. 3 hours after the Pentagon meeting, I got a desperate call from my mother, Linda, asking me to come to the family home for an urgent conversation. When I arrived, I found my father sitting in the living room with his head in his hands, visibly shaken by the magnitude of what had happened that afternoon. Kevin had been released on bail but was under FBI investigation, and CyberShield Industries had not only lost the Operation Guardian contract, it was now under federal scrutiny that could lead to the company's shutdown. My mother began crying the moment she saw me walk in, finally grasping the depth of the military respect I had earned over the years, the same respect they had completely ignored. "David, we didn't know. We never imagined that you had so much power, so much responsibility," she said between sobs, trying to process how they had underestimated their own son so severely. My father looked up, eyes red, and for the first time in over a decade, looked at me with something that resembled a mix of pride and deep regret. "Son, I made a terrible mistake," my father said, his voice breaking, struggling to find the right words after years of arrogance and dismissal. "I spent so much time building this company, trying to create a legacy, that I couldn't see you had already built something far greater and more important than all of this." He gestured vaguely toward the business trophies on the shelf, once his pride, now insignificant compared to the reality of what I truly did for this country. I sat in the armchair across from them, holding the same calm posture I'd used in the meeting, and explained that I had never sought superiority or power over them. "I never wanted to be better than you," I said, watching their surprised expressions. "I just wanted you to respect my choice, to acknowledge that serving the country isn't a lesser or less important profession than running a business." The identity they had built for me, the failed son, was finally being replaced by the truth of who I had always been. My mother tried to approach me for a hug, but I maintained a respectful distance, making it clear that forgiveness wouldn't come automatically just because they had discovered my real position. You had 15 years to get to know me, to ask about my work, to show interest in my career, I said with the same coldness I'd used to expose CyberShield's irregularities. Instead, you chose to humiliate me in public, treat me like a failure, and use my presence at family events as an opportunity to express your disappointment. Kevin arrived an hour later, still visibly shaken from the FBI interrogation and the legal consequences he would be facing in the months ahead. He tried to apologize, claiming he didn't know about my true position, but I stopped him with a simple hand gesture. Kevin, you knew exactly who I was, while your older brother who chose to serve his country instead of the family's interests, I said, holding firm eye contact. What you didn't know was that this choice gave me more power and responsibility than you ever imagined, but that should never have mattered for the respect you owed me as family. I laid out the new terms of our family relationship with the same military precision I used to coordinate field operations. From now on, if you want to have any kind of relationship with me, it will be based on mutual respect and genuine recognition, I stated, watching their reactions carefully. There will be no more dismissive comments about my career, no more unfavorable comparisons to Kevin, and definitely no more public humiliation. The justice I had sought wasn't just about legal exposure or professional consequences. It was about establishing a family dynamic rooted in dignity and mutual respect. As I stood up to leave, my father made one last attempt at immediate reconciliation, promising to do everything differently and make up for the past. I paused at the door and looked back at them one final time, seeing three people who finally understood the weight of their mistakes, but who would need to prove through action, not words, that they had truly changed. The family rejection you put me through all these years can't be erased with one conversation, I said firmly. If you truly want to rebuild our relationship, you'll have to show through consistent actions over time that you finally understand who I am and what I stand for. 6 months after that final confrontation at the family house, I received an unexpected email from Kevin with the subject line, "Thank you, brother." He had gone through a strict internal audit process, lost his position as CFO, but managed to avoid criminal charges by fully cooperating with the federal investigation. In the email, he wrote, "David, I finally understand that you weren't trying to destroy me. You were trying to save me from myself, while also protecting our country from people like me." It was the first time in decades my brother acknowledged not just my values but the true importance of my work. 2 weeks after that email, Kevin called and suggested we meet at a small military cafe near the Quantico base, far from the corporate settings that had defined our relationship for so long. When we sat across from each other, we were no longer the Major General and the former CFO. We were just two brothers trying to rebuild a connection that had been lost long ago. "I spent years thinking you were the family failure," he said, nervously stirring his coffee. "But now I realize I was the one failing, as a brother, as a person, and as a citizen." The identity he had built for me was finally being replaced by the truth of who I had always been. The most surprising moment came 3 months later, when I received a copy of an email my father had sent to all CyberShield Industries employees. In it, he publicly admitted he had failed to recognize his own son's achievements and worth, and that his blindness nearly destroyed not just our family, but the company's integrity. "My son David is a major general in the U.S. Army, responsible for decisions that affect the safety of millions," he wrote, "and I spent 15 years treating his dedication to this country as if it were less important than our corporate profits." It was a public apology I never expected to receive. The following week, my mother called me in tears, not from sadness, but a strange mix of pride and regret. "David, your father wants you to come home," she said with a trembling voice. "Not for a formal visit, not for a tense dinner, but home, to finally be part of the family. For the first time in years, I felt there might be a real chance for rebuilding, not based on my military rank or the power I held, but on genuine respect and the understanding that my choice to serve the country had always been valid and valuable." When I finally accepted the invitation for dinner at the family home, I found something I hadn't seen in over a decade. A photo of me in uniform, proudly displayed in the living room alongside Kevin's graduation pictures and the family's business milestones. My mother greeted me with a heartfelt hug and said, "I'm proud of you. Not because you're a major general, not because you oversee government contracts, but because you're my son, and you chose to dedicate your life to something greater than yourself." In that moment, the years of family rejection finally transformed into true acceptance. During dinner, for the first time in my adult life, my family asked real questions about my work, about the missions I led, about the challenges of protecting national security in an increasingly complex world. These weren't surface-level questions meant to impress, but genuine efforts to understand the person I had become and the responsibilities I carried. Kevin even said, "Why, David, I finally get why you chose this path. You found a way to make a real difference in the world, while I was just moving numbers around on spreadsheets." My father, who for years had seen me as the son who wasted his potential, finally realized that I had found my purpose long before he was ever able to see past his own business ambitions. "Son, I built a company that employs hundreds and generates millions in revenue," he said during dessert. "But you protect millions of lives and secure an entire nation. I should have recognized that a long time ago." The justice I had sought didn't come through punishment or revenge, but through a late yet sincere acknowledgement of the value in my choices. Today, when I look back on this entire journey, I see that the revenge I once wanted evolved into something far deeper and more lasting: the restoration of family dignity and the recognition that serving one's country isn't a lesser path, but a calling worthy of respect and admiration. Sometimes, when the silence of my Washington apartment feels especially heavy, I pull out the family photo I now carry in my wallet, all of us smiling genuinely for the first time in decades, and I remember that something good and lasting was born out of all that pain and misunderstanding we endured for so many years. As I look back and reflect on this entire journey, I realize that sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who most need to learn about respect and recognition. The revenge I once wanted turned into something much deeper: the restoration of family dignity and the proof that serving your country is not a lesser path, but a calling worthy of admiration. Today, my family finally understands that real power doesn't come from corporate titles. It comes from dedicating yourself to something greater than yourself. Sometimes, we have to go through the pain of rejection to truly discover our strength and identity. And you, who made it this far, you've probably lived something similar. Maybe not in a corporate or family setting, but you've likely tasted the bitterness of being underestimated by people who were supposed to support you. Share in the comments. What was the moment you proved your worth to those who doubted you? Your story might inspire thousands of people going through the same thing right now. Don't be afraid to share your experience. We all have silent battles that deserve to be seen and celebrated. If this story of resilience and recognition touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to be recognized for your true worth. Turn on notifications to receive more real stories of people who turned humiliation into triumph, rejection into respect, and pain into purpose. These are the stories that truly matter, the ones that remind us our dignity never depends on anyone else's approval.